Last but not least, we saved the best for last. This is our panel on art and activism. Here we have some wonderful local Louisiana creators, artists, activists, wonderful folks who can join us today. I'm going to have you ladies introduce yourselves. We'll go around the room, so to speak, and then I'll hand it off to Rain. She's going to go ahead and lead the conversation, and you guys can talk about the wonderful ways that art and making and activism all tie together. So, Leslie, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Leslie Moore. I'm with Get Rec Tech Support. It is a website where women can get together and we talk about IT and gaming. And I offer a lot of resources for women who are interested. All the resources on my site are free if you're interested in learning more about IT or getting into gaming.
Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonny McDonald. I teach performance studies and communication studies at LSU and try to make art within my job context there. But I've also got my hands in various projects over the years, making weird trash art performances to talk about plastic pollution, doing dialogue facilitation using creative movement to talk about race and race politics, and yeah, generally trying to get people to use their bodies to make social commentary and figure out social issues together.
Excellent. Alex?
Hey, I'm Dr. Alex Torres. I'm Program Director for Humanities Amped, a Baton Rouge-based nonprofit that focuses on amplifying well-being, community-minded problem-solving, and critical literacy in public schools. We believe that youth are problem solvers and not problems to be solved, and we believe that the arts is a way to think through solving social justice problems.
Excellent. And Paige, welcome back, Paige. We just saw you in our last panel. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I am Paige Colwell. I am a public school teacher. I teach art at McKinley Middle Magnet. I also was formerly the owner and operator of Avery Page Designs, which did a lot of arts and activism work, especially centered around like the marches and things like that. I work with a number of organizations. One of them is PSN, Baton Rouge, and I do a lot of kind of teaching activism to my kids.
Excellent. And Rain.
Okay, hey again, everyone. I'm Rain Araneda, and I wear a lot of hats today. I'm wearing my makerspace and MC hat for this panel. And I have worked with mostly all of you. And so I might ask some personal direct questions. Leslie, I'm very curious to work with you in the future because that's happening. Because if you were on the last panel, I'm also a STEM teacher. STEAM, what? So I want to go ahead and get started. I'm really, really excited about this panel. Following this panel is a small student film festival. So feel free to tune in and continue with that. And see what our kids are up to in the world of creating art. And then feel free to judge as well. So the first thing I want to do is kind of get to let everyone else get to know a little bit about you guys. And I want you to tell us what it means to be an artist. What mediums do you use to facilitate your art? So I have seen Bonny's work. I love Bonny's work. I have seen Alex's and Paige's work. And Leslie, I've heard a lot about your work. So tell us about what is your medium and what does it mean to be an artist? Let's start with Bonny. I'll just pick some folks. I know, so sorry. So you were writing.
I think of myself as an educator, maybe first. So like a teaching artist, right? So for me, often that is a piece of what's happening, even if I'm working with a group of adults who's making work together, that we are entering to collaboratively into an experience where we're all going to learn. So not necessarily that I am the educator, right? Like the sole leader and educator of the thing, but while I might have a vision for facilitating a project that we're working together, that we make an agreement that we're teaching each other and that our goal is to, teach those who encounter our project and inspire those who encounter our project. So, and maybe that's a little bit of just like fear of claiming the title of artist, right? I feel like that is a long time, like fear for maybe women in particular. I'm not sure, like giving myself permission to call myself an artist and to follow that like calling in my heart has always conflicted with my need to like, be practical and I don't know, right? So I'm always sort of trying to balance and also talk to young people and students who have that similar conflict and interest, right? Like trying to make it work, because a lot of times art isn't as valued. Like a lot of the coolest arty projects I've done, I've not been paid for. So trying to figure out how to work art into the curriculum I use at LSU in various classes, including like basic public speaking class or whatever, has been a part of what it means for me to be an artist, right? So, but I think like this general question of sort of what is art and being an artist is about getting to, I think of art as an invitation to know ourselves better, to know each other better, to invite ourselves to recreate ourselves in the world in a more fair and equitable image. So I think invitation is like when I saw a list of questions, possible questions, and that's the word that came to mind. Like, how can we give ourselves, I think art gives us permission to more fully be ourselves and to more fully see others.
And you do a lot of performance art. I've seen the work that you produce, and I have my close personal person who has been in your art and wearing all of the trash. And for me, that's a beautiful thing as an environmentalist. I love that. Would you say that performance art is your main medium?
Performance art and performance poetry. I came into it, the artistry scene as a performer of other people's poetry through speech and debate as a high school student, and then really took that up as a performance poet. And I didn't really get into more of the theatrical directing, public performance kind of stuff, like collaborative performance, until I was a graduate student at LSU.
Well, I can definitely say that street theater is one of my favorite things as an activist to see at different events. I love street theater. I love puppets. It's my jam. Mm-hmm. And I also appreciate the segue to bring it to Alex. Alex, tell us what it means to be an artist and what your medium is.
Yeah, I think I really resonated with Bonny whenever Bonny was saying the teaching artist, right? I think in terms and the strangeness of claiming the title. I certainly write poetry. I am a writer, but to call myself a poet sounds, it sounds weird to claim that title. But I'm also an educator as well, and I think that there is an art to teaching and facilitating that a lot of people don't realize, that the quality teaching and facilitation takes in a degree of finesse and thinking through and acknowledging emotion and expression in a space. So yeah, I think that all of these things are interconnected, and definitely in our nonprofit and with the students that we work with, we want them to understand art, be it when we write poetry together, when we draw together, when we do forum theater together, as this way to like analyze the world around them.
One of your students, who is one of my former students, did a really wonderful piece that they came out of my environmental science class and wrote a beautiful piece on the world and current climate change issues and race issues and environmental justice. And I thought that the ability to put those issues into spoken word was just fantastic. I'm going to shout out Asia Reese. If you're ever listening to this, watch it later. Amazing student. And as a person who also used poetry growing up as my expression to redefine who I was and what I thought, I really value spoken word. So, but I also value the digital and the graphic arts world, and also a lot of different mediums that are more textile. Like, I want to get my hands dirty. I like to build stuff, as we know if you were watching another panel. So I'm going to take that over to Paige and Leslie. in any particular order, if you guys want to jump in and speak to what it means to be an artist and what your medium is. Ooh, Leslie, jam on it.
My medium is more digital art. Like I said, my website is up. If anyone saw it, might have seen throughout the convention, there was a presentation I did about my business. I did the music that was included in the presentation. I do my own music through the website. I have gaming sprites. I have digital software. So basically, I go with more of the technical side of art. And what I think it means to be an artist is a way to express yourself no matter how it comes across, whether you're using the normal mediums of paint or crayon, color pencil. Because I have a son, he's an artist and he loves to sketch and he loves to draw. So I'm surrounded by art constantly. And he wants to go into more of the digital realm and be an animator. And that's kind of a segue into project I'm putting on at the end of the month. I'm actually going to have an animated history of video game consoles. So I'm doing that. I'm doing all the music. I'm using animation software, but that's the medium I chose. And that's something I love to work with, and using my art as a way to teach women the easiest way you can, if you're a gamer and you've always wondered where the concept of video games came from. I want to show it in a way that's fun, easy to understand, easy to learn, easy to keep up with. And at the same time, you're going to enjoy it, and you can show it to kids, and kids will understand, like, oh, this is where video games came from, and this is why I like playing the games. And I'm just going to always use the digital form.
Yeah, I appreciate music a lot. Also, I'm sure everyone does. And I think the intersection of the visual with music that we see in film, we saw someone on another panel for Novak, that intersection of the light, of the music, of the visual really gets into who we are. It really touches places sometimes that we didn't even know existed. There was a recent article I was listening to about Requiem for a Dream, and how just the simple string chords that they put together, which we all, if you've seen that movie, it's pretty, you all know that part, exactly which part I'm talking about. And it was just the magic moment, right? The magic moment that created that space that they didn't even know that it was there. So good. We have lots of mediums here. I'm feeling it. Paige, takes away to another mediums.
So first I'd like to say, I think I need to get Leslie in my classroom with my kids. I teach animation, Leslie, at McKinley Middle. So, and we do a lot of gamifying in the classroom. So turning lesson plans into games. And I think that you would be a great person to kind of talk to. So we'll get together. I hold the title of artist, activist, and educator, all three of those. And I mostly work these days kind of going off of what Bonny said, because it also really resonated with me. My art is teaching my kids how to problem solve through art. And I think that that's really what it means to be an artist, is creative thinking, creative problem solving, finding interesting ways to solve the problem. And so that's what we focus on in my classroom. And then I forgot what the second part of the question was.
What's your favorite jam medium that you like to use?
So for me, I am a illustrator and graphic designer. That's what I was before I became a teacher. And that's what I still do somewhat. But I mostly use pen and ink and Photoshop, digital illustration.
Awesome. Yeah, I obviously love your work as well. We'll get into that later as I ask some individual questions. But first, I also want to, I think it was Bonny talked about, and also Alex, like, what does it mean to call yourself an artist, and like, how do you claim that title? Another really controversial title that people don't always like to claim is the term activist. And since you all agreed to be on this panel, you must in some way see your work as focused on making a change or some kind of impact in society or culture. So I'm going to ask you to tell me what it means to be an activist. What does that word mean? It's so, it's one of those really controversial terms. People shy away from it. So tell us what it means to be an activist, and kind of break the stigma. Bonny. I am just keep doing it.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's partly content related. When we're talking about the blend between arts and activism. So if I have an intentional message designed to ask people to change a belief or action, I think we're doing activism. And maybe I'm being too concrete here, but I guess I'm just working my way in. And so, I mean, because I think that they're making, say, a beautiful painting that doesn't have a concrete message for change in the world is useful. And, I can see how you could philosophically think of it as activism in terms of following your heart and making space for yourself to do your thing. And so I'm leaving room for that. But in performance and in poetry, I think there is a distinction where there is, in fact, sometimes within performance studies, at least, there can be a sense that, or in theater in particular, if you're doing activism and you have a really clear message, that it is sort of less artful in some ways, right? Like that you're crossing over into kind of a public performance or maybe even spoken word, but the doing a traditional kind of theater piece is sort of art in and of itself, perhaps, while for me, when an activist angle is introduced, there is a clear ask of the audience to think about something differently or take a different belief. I mean, take up a different belief. However, I do think that there is an activist component in even, for example, asking folks in a classroom to use their bodies to interact with curriculum, right? I think that, and in fact, even just using arts in curriculum where we don't otherwise expect it to be is also a form of activism, because of the ways that the institution of education is maybe increasingly rigid, and doesn't leave as much room for student expression. So like making space for inviting that kind of expression, I think, is an activism in its own right. And I see that at the college level too, right? There is something, even just by privileging using arts as a way to interact with whatever kind of content, from science to communication studies, English, is doing this thing of supporting a belief or like underlining, calling to action the use of arts as education. So I guess those are sort of two ways of seeing activism. Yeah. But for me, I'm really interested and love to get people talking in creative ways about our own trash, our own production and culpability in plastic pollution, and also about examining our racial interactions and racism. And so those are sort of overt, right, asks and activists' questions.
Love it. Alex, you want to follow up with that?
Yes. So for me, what activism or activist does is really imagine what could be and actively make strides to transform that injustice, to make it be that way, right? And so like in our nonprofit Humanities Amped, we really give students the tools to analyze the problems around them, to think critically about what their current context is, and then think about what can we collectively do together. We also like really have this idea of like transforming yourself to transform the world, because as you know, Adrienne Marie Brown writes about this idea of the fractals of like, if you transform a smaller system, it impacts the larger system, right? So you know, how we read the world, how we analyze the world, how we analyze these problems, we have to know the roots of the problems in order to be able to fix the problems. And we need to really have a clear vision that we collectively agree upon to work towards. So I think that's where activism, that kind of definition is what resonates with me.
Awesome. Thank you. Leslie, and Paige, as a female-bodied person and somebody who loves anime a lot, you may or may not, yeah, lots. My kids are always like, what? I'm like, yeah, you don't know nothing. But let's talk about, well, first, tell me about what it means to be an activist to you. But if either one of you want to touch on the subject of animation and women's issues while you talk about what activism is, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think of myself as an activist for women involved in two industries that have always been male dominated. That is information technology and the video game industry. It's an all boys club. And there are women in these industries, and I'm trying to add more women, period, overall. I feel like since we're not there, and there are a lot of women who might want to get into IT and then they're scared or they don't know where to start. That's why I'm offering all reference materials I've collected over the past 15 years of my career. I'm giving them away so people can get started. If you want to get certified, I got certification stuff. You don't have to pay hundreds of dollars. I did that for you. I want more women in these fields, and especially in the animation side as well, especially with anime, with tropes with women. Same thing with video games. We have a lot of female tropes. Female armor is very exposing. The strongest armor you have, you might be a string bikini, but here we are. And there's a lot of negativity and sexism in these industries. And I feel like if we get more women involved, we can start changing the conversation and we can start having more input. I would love to see more women, especially in gaming. I want to be able to sponsor eventually an all-female esports team. I want women. There are women out there. I'm part of an all-girl gamer group on Facebook. It's called the Athena Alliance. Shout out the Athena Alliance. We are hardcore gamers. We're just as bad as guys. I kid you not. And I feel like women can get in here, get a foot in the door. We can make some major change. And that's how I'm trying to do as an activist. I'm giving more women an in rather than giving them an out. And,
I agree with you 100%. As a science and engineering background person, it's changed a lot for sure, but not enough. And I'm constantly trying to encourage the girls that I might have in my classroom or that I come across. Don't shy down. Don't shy away from using your voice. And Bonny and Alex have both talked about like the vocal component. But there's a lot said in imagery, right? I mean, I have a photography background also, so there's a lot there that you can represent. And so, Paige, let's talk about how you might see yourself as an activist, and if you want to talk about some inspirational graphic artists or some work that you've seen as part of your activist and art integration, let's hear about that.
So most of my activism has been using art to raise the funds to fund activism, with the exception of the activism that I feel like I do in my classroom, because it goes back to what both I think Bonny and Alex talked about, where you have to teach the kids how to critically analyze what is happening around them and what the information that they're taking in, and you also have to teach them how to not necessarily tell them how to respond to it, but teach them the avenues of response that they have to it. So my kids this week just learned that they can write their school board members. They didn't know that was an option, and so they don't know these things, but these decisions affect them. So you just basically just opening the door for them and showing them, hey, you can do this. In terms of how visual arts comes into activism, aside from just, selling the work to raise the funds, there is also something to be said for how visually artwork and compositions, and I talk about this with my kids all the time, can play a mind trick on you. So when you're standing there and you're looking at a piece, I tell them you have 5 seconds to get your viewers' attention. So they need to be able to scan it in 5 seconds and find a reason for their eye to stay. And once they do that, they start wandering. So we talk about movement and how to control your viewers' movement through your piece. And you have to give them something to process. And that again goes back to teaching the kids how to analyze, because if you don't teach them how to analyze a piece of artwork and critically analyze it, then they become the adults who walk in and don't understand how to analyze it in a gallery or on television or on a t-shirt, you know. But yeah, there's a lot of psychology that goes behind how you build a composition there, right? To bring your viewers' attention to one thing or another.
I think you touched on a really interesting point too. There's a lot of conversation around what a piece means to a person, right? And so that brings you into kind of a political conversation sometimes, whether the art is politicized or not. Just the politics behind where you're coming from to interpret that is really interesting. So whether it's your racial background or your gender background or what have you, like your interpretation is really based and rooted in your own experiences and your own demographic for how you interpret that. So there's a lot of controversy around whether or not artists should use their platform, whether you're a musician, whether or not you are like, let's say you're Banksy, right? Love Banksy. If you're a graphic artist, if you're speaking, right? If you're Maya Angelou, who are you? What are you doing? And do you have the right to use your platform in this way? And that's a really big conversation that I find fascinating. I mean, I guess I shouldn't give my opinion here, but like, I'd like to hear what y'all's, I really would like to, but I'll just let y'all give your opinion on whether you think it is the responsibility of artists to use their platform, if it's something that should be used at times, but maybe not others. Like, what if you are able to use your voice and use your art and whatever it is that you make in a way to touch people? Do you have a responsibility to ask people, as Bonny said, to think about these issues and to really like bring them into that conversation, intentionally or otherwise? Anybody want to volunteer, or shall I start with Bonny again? All right, Leslie, go for it.
I think we all have a responsibility, as long as we have a platform, to make a statement. Like I said, I'm purposely making a statement that, yes, I am saying blatantly, on my site it says a safe space for women in IT and gaming. I'm blatantly saying I have every right to use my site to encourage women, to upbuild women, because we have obviously seen we're underrepresented, and why not have a space that's for us? And I'm still young, I'm still fledgling, so I'm expecting about a pushback at some point, but also at the same time, I say on my site, I have already written up a response for what this site means and what I'm trying to do. I'm not saying you've got to enjoy what I'm doing. I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm not saying you have to agree it, but I have the right as an American to do this. And I'm using my right to help other women who don't have that voice. I just want to be one of many to get that out there. So I am going to use my platform, and I feel like most people who have the opportunity should.
Yeah, Bonny mentioned privilege when it comes to art in general. I mean, being able to make it as an artist and survive as that being your main, I mean, everybody here kind of has a second gig, right? So the privilege of being able to use your art to make money, if you are given that privilege, right, do you have the responsibility to speak on behalf of, or speak for those that you might assume are also waiting for someone to say something when they can't? So anybody else want to volunteer on this issue of whether or not you have the right or responsibility?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the point in a lot of ways. And I wanted to add that I think if we're afraid to take that stand, or if public figures, maybe you're like a pop singer and your fame comes from, and your artistry is not necessarily activist oriented, right? That seems to be where that question kind of comes to bear in some cases. And in those cases, I do think definitely, come on, help us out. But, for those of us here and for myself, I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to hear further, but I agree with Leslie that it's if we don't claim that stance, and if we're afraid to claim that stance, I think we're in dangerous territory, and I'm interested in how that is operating right now within a university or a secondary, or like a school system, where I think there is this sense like that a teacher sometimes isn't allowed to have an opinion, and that some students come in with that idea. And there's a lot of different ways to sort of play that game of wanting to teach critical thinking and wanting to teach about justice and equity, for example, without losing some of the maybe even activist students who come in with a different agenda. And so I'm interested in like how institutional policies might be written to allow room for those opinions on one hand. But also, like, I think that it is important to be savvy about the way that we, in the context at least of public institutions, right? The way we shape those invitations and messages so that the point and purpose and the teaching of empathy and maybe some of our messages sometimes I think have to be more subtle in those institutions and sometimes can be more overt. But either way, I think it's an interesting tension. And so I appreciate the question in terms of like the public figure in a broader kind of like famous person scale, and the public figure when it comes to inside a school or inside a city or inside like a place that isn't otherwise an invitation to take that stance. And I would say, yeah, we need to do it, but sometimes we have to be strategic about how we do it, lest we get booted out of that same system.
Paige, Alex, you want to follow up on that? Go for it, Paige.
So I'm really glad that Bonny brought up the celebrity behind that question, because that was what I was going to bring up. And so I can just build on it. So I think that as individual citizens of this world, we do have a responsibility. However, we also, in order to be activists, have to survive. And in order to do that, you have to have a job. You have to be able to feed yourself, right? And so a lot of this comes down to an individualized situation where, like she mentioned, there are people who are in situations where they can't really speak up for fear of some kind of retaliation, excuse me, whether that be losing their job or public persecution or what have you. And so I know a lot of people in the school system who are afraid to speak up, and because they will face some sort of retaliation. And so I try to be very mindful when I'm seeing these people, because to me it seems kind of spineless, but I don't want to be too judgmental, because I don't know what their consequences are or what they're hiding from. So
yeah, and Alex kind of walks a line there. Alex has been in teaching before and kind of has a little bit more liberation this year with Humanities Amped. And I'm familiar with the program. I work with Humanities Amped as well, and have seen their work progress since the beginning. And I really would love to hear from your perspective, especially building students' voices, what you feel about this issue, and also to kind of touch on what Paige said regarding, whether or not you have the ability to speak up more now, potentially.
Right. I do want to first add that, politics is personal is political, and that, nothing is created in a vacuum. So art is contextualized, and it has to do with how you're feeling, and it's personal, right? So, and that every choice, as Paige and Leslie brings out, especially when we think about representation in art, again, it's already political. So in terms of working with students, as working within the system, trying to transform the system from within is exhausting, and it just takes so much energy to try to stand in your own integrity and model what that looks like for your students. And that's why self-care really is essential, and finding a community that you can kind of collaborate with and vent with and just support each other with, because the systems are created to be oppressive. Systems are created to keep certain people in power. And so what I always have told my students is that they still have power regardless of whatever context they are in. Depending on the context, they might have less power or more power than others, but they still have power. So I think that, as Paige pointed out, having her students write to school board members, there's still ways to kind of sneak in the ways to critical thinking, or again, it's we're writing letters and it's building up their skills in literacy, but it's also subversive, right? You can find the ways to work the system from within. It's it's really hard to do it from within, and that's why I'm very lucky to not be within the system in terms of my paycheck is not tied to ABR, the school district, or LSU, you know. So there is more freedom there, but you know, I think it's just remembering what kind of power you do have and building power with your community.
Very well said. So we're at a stopping point. We have some wonderful film screenings from some great students at Novak that we have to share. So thank you so much for joining us for this panel. We had a wonderful day today. Some of you came back, Paige and Rain, and we really hope that this conversation continues. We hope that you guys keep in contact with each other, and any information about all of our panelists will be on Baton Rouge.makerfair.com. Thank you, ladies. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, guys.